In the late 1800s, Clara Simmons lived on a small farm in a quiet town nestled in the vast, unforgiving landscape of the American West. The land was rough and the weather even harsher, and life on the farm was never easy. Clara, however, had grown up with a strong spirit, one that carried her through the challenges of each day. She was a young woman with dreams that stretched far beyond the borders of the dusty farm she called home. Clara's parents, though hardworking and honest, were bound by the heavy expectations of society. They believed in tradition. Marriage was seen as the next step for every young woman, and it was assumed that Clara would follow this path, just as her mother had before her. But Clara had different ideas. The town was full of gossip and whispers, and it was known that marriage to a wealthy man could offer safety and comfort. So when Jacob Thompson, a well-known and prosperous landowner, came to Clara's parents with an offer of marriage, it seemed like the best thing for everyone. Thompson was the kind of man who commanded respect. His land stretched for miles, and his influence was felt in every corner of the town. He was wealthy, successful, and considered by many to be a good catch. But Clara was not like the other women in town. She wasn't interested in the luxury and comfort that marriage to Jacob Thompson could bring. She didn't want to be another trophy wife, living a life dictated by society's rules. Clara longed for something different, something more meaningful. She dreamed of a life where she could be free to make her own choices, to work with her hands, and to build a life on her own terms. When Jacob Thompson proposed, Clara's heart sank. She couldn't imagine marrying a man she barely knew, especially one who represented everything she didn't want in life. Clara tried to explain to her parents that marriage wasn't her path. She wanted to explore the world, learn new things, and live a life filled with purpose. But her parents didn't understand. Her mother cried, saying it was a great opportunity, a chance for Clara to live comfortably and raise a family in peace. Her father, though quieter, agreed. "You're being foolish," he said. "A man like Jacob Thompson doesn't come along every day. Think of what he can give you, a life without struggle." Clara, however, remained firm. She had no desire for a life of wealth if it meant giving up her independence. She knew that accepting Jacob's proposal would mean sacrificing the very things she held dear, but her refusal didn't sit well with the town or her family. Word of her rejection spread like wildfire, and soon people began to talk. Clara had embarrassed herself, they said. She had turned down a man who could give her everything she could ever want, and her parents, too, were criticized for not pushing her to accept the proposal. As days went by, the pressure only grew. Her family began to withdraw from her. They didn't speak to her much, and when they did, their words were laced with disappointment. It was clear that they didn't understand her decision. Clara began to feel the weight of their disapproval. She had hoped that they would respect her choice, but instead they seemed angry, as if she had done something wrong. Then came the moment that would change everything. One afternoon, Clara's father spoke to her in a quiet voice. "Clara," he said, "you've made your decision, but I think you're making a mistake. You've turned your back on something good. Jacob Thompson is a man who can protect you. He can give you everything you've ever dreamed of. You should marry him." Clara's heart tightened. She had heard this argument before, and she knew it was coming. She wanted to stand firm, to tell her father that she didn't need anyone to protect her, but the look in his eyes made her hesitate. "I won't change my mind," Clara said softly. "I can't marry him." Her father's expression darkened. He turned away as if he had heard enough. But it wasn't over. The next day, Jacob Thompson came to the farm with his offer once again. And this time Clara's father did not ask her opinion. "I've made my decision," her father said, his voice cold. "Clara will marry you." Clara's world tilted. Her voice caught in her throat, and she felt a sharp pang of betrayal. Her father had gone behind her back, offering her up as if she were a possession to be traded. She tried to protest, to speak her truth, but her father's expression silenced her. That evening, Clara's parents gathered her in the small, dimly lit living room. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Clara had ever experienced. It wasn't a discussion or a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. Her father, angry at her refusal to marry Jacob Thompson, demanded that she submit to their wishes. Clara, though heartbroken, held firm to her beliefs. But as the hours passed, the pressure mounted and things took a darker turn. In the quiet of the night, Clara felt the weight of their anger. They didn't understand her desire for independence, her refusal to follow the paths they had set for her. Her mother's tears were bitter, and her father's stern silence felt like a wall she couldn't break. The rejection from her family stung more than anything else. Clara began to feel truly alone, but her resolve didn't waver. She knew what she wanted for her life. It wasn't wealth or luxury. It was freedom. She would not be a pawn in someone else's game. She would find her own way, even if it meant facing the world alone. And so Clara's journey began. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a story that would lead her to a life she had never imagined. A life where the choices she made would not only shape her future, but would also change the lives of those around her. Days passed since Clara's refusal to marry Jacob Thompson, and the tension at the farm grew unbearable. Clara had never felt so alone in her life. The house, once filled with the warmth of laughter and family, now felt cold and distant. Her parents had retreated into their own world, leaving Clara to face the consequences of her decision. Her father, once her protector, had become a shadow of the man she had known. His words, once filled with guidance and love, now felt like harsh commands. "You've made your choice," he would say, his voice heavy with disappointment. "But don't expect any support from us if you continue down this path." Clara tried to ignore the sting of his words, but they cut deep. She had always been close to her father, and it hurt to see him so distant, so angry. Her mother, too, was no longer the gentle, comforting presence Clara had once relied on. She no longer spoke of her dreams for Clara's future or asked about her day. Instead, her mother's silence was filled with an unspoken sorrow. Clara had hoped her family would understand her decision. She had believed that they would respect her desire for independence, but instead, they seemed to think she was throwing away an opportunity to secure a future. To them, Jacob Thompson was a savior, and by turning him down, Clara had made herself the enemy. The whispers from the townspeople only added to Clara's feeling of betrayal. Everywhere she went, people talked behind her back. She turned down a good man, they would whisper as Clara passed by. "A man like Jacob doesn't come around often." Their words stung, but Clara refused to let them sway her. She knew in her heart that she had made the right choice. She did not need anyone to tell her what was best for her life, but the isolation was unbearable. Clara spent long hours alone, walking the fields, tending to the animals, and doing the chores that had always been her responsibility. The quiet of the farm gave her time to think, but it also made her feel more and more like an outsider. She missed the days when her family had supported her, when their love had been unconditional. Now it felt as though they were punishing her for standing up for what she believed in. Her loneliness grew each day, and soon, Clara began to question her decision. Was it worth it? Was her independence worth the price of losing her family's love? She had always been strong, but now the weight of isolation pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had always dreamed of living her life on her own terms, but now that dream felt distant and uncertain. One evening, after a long day of work, Clara sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the vast empty fields. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, but the beauty of the scene did little to ease the ache in her heart. She could hear the faint sound of her parents' voices inside the house, but their words were lost in the quiet. Clara wished she could go back to a time when everything was simple, when her family was united and supportive. But she knew she could never go back. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back now. The next morning, Clara was startled when a visitor arrived at the farm. She had not been expecting anyone, especially not Jacob Thompson. His sudden appearance felt like an intrusion, a reminder of everything she had rejected. Jacob was dressed in fine clothes, a symbol of his wealth and status. He had always been polite to Clara, but there had always been an air of superiority about him. Clara had never felt at ease in his presence. He was a man of power, used to getting what he wanted, and she had no desire to be one of his possessions. "Good morning, Miss Simmons," Jacob said, tipping his hat as he approached the porch. His smile was warm, but it didn't reach his eyes. Clara could tell that he was not pleased by her refusal, and his visit was no accident. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Clara replied, her voice cool but polite. She stood up from her chair, unsure of what to expect. "I wanted to speak with you about your decision," Jacob said, his tone calm but firm. "I understand that you've chosen a different path, but I believe you're making a mistake. A man like me could give you everything you need, a comfortable life, security, and respect. What more could you want?" Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She had heard these words before, but they felt like a trap now, an attempt to make her feel guilty for the choice she had made. She knew that Jacob's offer was about more than just marriage. It was about control, about molding her into the woman he wanted her to be. "I don't want what you're offering," Clara said, her voice steady but firm. "I don't need a life of comfort if it means giving up my freedom. I want to live on my own terms, not be someone's possession." Jacob's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "I admire your independence, Miss Simmons," he said, his voice softening. "But I think you're being unrealistic. The world is a hard place and no one can survive alone. You'll see that in time." Clara stood her ground, refusing to back down. "I'm not afraid of hard work. I've lived through hard times and I will continue to do so. But I will not live my life for anyone else's approval." Jacob's expression darkened, and for a moment Clara thought he might say something hurtful, but instead he simply nodded. "I respect your decision," he said, his voice cold. "But you should know that your refusal has consequences. Your family is not happy with you, and I doubt they will be able to help you much longer. You'll see, life is not as simple as you think." With that, Jacob turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing alone on the porch. His words lingered in her mind, but she pushed them aside. She would not let him or anyone else dictate her life. She had made her choice, and she would stand by it, no matter the consequences. As Clara watched Jacob ride off into the distance, she felt a mix of anger and sadness. The world she had known was changing, and she was no longer a part of it. But she had no regrets. She would find a way to make her own path, even if it meant facing the world alone. Clara didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it. She had learned that the hardest battles were often the ones fought within, and she had already won the most important fight of all, the fight to be true to herself. The days on the farm felt longer for Clara. Each morning she woke up with a heavy heart, knowing the weight of her decision was still fresh. Her family remained distant, cold even, and her interactions with them had become less and less. She spent much of her time alone, tending to the animals and working the fields, finding comfort in the quiet solitude of the land. The once familiar sound of the farmhouse door opening and closing had been replaced by an empty silence. Her parents had withdrawn, not just from Clara, but from each other too. The tension between them was palpable. Clara tried to reach out to them to offer some kind of conversation, but every time she did, the same coldness met her. The house had lost its warmth. One day, as Clara worked on the fence line near the western edge of the farm, a familiar figure appeared in the distance. It was James Westbrook, a man Clara hadn't seen much of in years. James wasn't from the town, though he lived nearby on a sprawling ranch of his own. He was quiet, a man who kept to himself, preferring the company of his horses and cattle over people. A widower for several years, James had built his life around his work. He didn't seek out others, but whenever he did speak, people listened. Clara wasn't sure what had brought him to her farm, but she was grateful for the company. At first, she thought it might have been a simple visit for neighborly duties. But as he got closer, Clara saw something different in his eyes, a deep sympathy, as if he understood something about her that no one else did. "Good afternoon, Clara," James said, tipping his hat as he approached. His voice was deep, calm, and steady, just like the man himself. "Afternoon, James," Clara replied, wiping the sweat from her forehead. She didn't expect him to be there, but the sight of him was a small relief. The loneliness of the past few weeks had been heavy on her. James looked around the farm, his eyes briefly scanning the empty horizon. "It's quiet around here," he said, almost to himself. "Too quiet for someone like you." Clara smiled faintly. "I've gotten used to it." She paused for a moment, noticing the concern in his gaze. "Why are you here, James?" "I didn't expect to see anyone." James stepped closer, placing his hands on the worn fence. "I wanted to talk. I heard about what happened, about your decision to turn down Thompson's offer." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized just how far the news had spread, but it didn't surprise her. The town was small and word traveled fast. "I didn't think anyone would care about it," she said, her voice quiet. "Oh, people care," James replied, his voice steady. "Especially the ones who don't understand. They'll talk, but they won't walk in your shoes." Clara looked down at the ground, feeling the weight of his words. She had heard the whispers from the townspeople, the murmurs of judgment, the glances of pity. But hearing James say it out loud made it feel more real. "I didn't want to marry him," she said softly. It wasn't about the money or the land. I wanted to choose my own path. James nodded slowly. He understood. He had never been the type to follow the crowd either. His life had always been about solitude, and that was something he cherished. I respect that, he said. Not many people would have the courage to turn down an offer like that, especially when everyone expects you to take it. Clara met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for any hint of judgment. But there was none. Instead, there was only understanding. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt like someone saw her for who she truly was. It's been harder than I thought, she admitted. My family. They don't understand. I thought they'd support me, but instead they've turned away. James studied her for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. Sometimes family doesn't know what's best for us, he said. They want to protect us, but in doing so, they end up trying to control us. They don't always see the bigger picture. Clara nodded. I thought they'd be happy for me, that I'd be able to live the life I wanted. But now they're angry and I feel like I've lost them. The words hung in the air, heavy and painful, but James didn't look away. Instead, he spoke again, his voice softer now. You know, Clara, I've seen you work this land for years. You're strong, independent. You don't need anyone to give you permission to be who you are, and I respect that more than anyone in this town. Clara felt a warmth in her chest at his words, a warmth that had been absent for far too long. Thank you, James, she said, her voice quiet with gratitude. It means more than you know. James shifted his weight and stepped back, his gaze still on her. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but if you ever need someone to talk to or if you need help, don't hesitate to come by. You're not alone, Clara. She looked at him, surprised. James was a man of few words, and his offer, though simple, carried a depth of meaning. He wasn't offering to fix her problems or solve her struggles. He was offering companionship, support, and understanding. Thank you, Clara said again, this time with more conviction. She had spent so many days feeling like an outsider, unsure of what her future held. But James's words reminded her that she didn't have to face it all alone. James gave her a small smile, tipping his hat once more. Take care, Clara, he said, turning to leave. I'll see you around. As Clara watched him walk away, a sense of peace settled over her. She had felt alone for so long, but now, for the first time in a while, she felt something else. Hope. Hope that, maybe, there was a future where she didn't have to choose between who she was and what the world expected of her. Hope that she could still find a way to be true to herself, no matter the obstacles. Clara stood there for a long time, watching as James disappeared over the horizon. His visit had given her more than just a conversation. It had given her the reminder that there were still people in the world who saw her for who she was, not just what others thought she should be. And that made all the difference. Weeks passed since James Westbrook had visited Clara. While her days continued to be filled with hard work and moments of silence, there was a shift within her. It was subtle at first, a small flicker of hope that began to grow stronger each day. James's words, simple but meaningful, had planted a seed of strength inside her. He had shown her that she wasn't as alone as she had felt, and that there was still room for kindness and understanding in the world. Though the pain of her family's disappointment still weighed heavily on her heart, Clara found comfort in the idea that she could forge her own path. Her decision to stand up for herself had come with great sacrifice, but now she was beginning to see that it could also lead to something new, something she hadn't expected. One afternoon, after a long day of tending to the animals, Clara stood on the porch looking out across the fields. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the land. It was a peaceful sight, one that always brought Clara a sense of calm. But that day something was different. She wasn't just looking at the fields. She was thinking about them, thinking about how they had been her family's land for generations, but how, for the first time, she was seeing them as her own. It was a feeling that had been slowly building inside her, a realization that she was no longer bound by the expectations of others. She was free to make choices for herself. And though the future still seemed uncertain, Clara felt more prepared than ever to face it head-on. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching the porch. Clara turned to see James walking toward her, his hat in hand. There was a soft smile on his face, one that seemed more genuine than the polite smiles he had offered in their past encounters. His presence brought a sense of ease to Clara, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the weight of her troubles pressing so heavily on her. Good evening, Clara, James said, his voice warm. Evening, James, Clara replied, offering a small smile of her own. I wasn't expecting you. I wasn't sure if you'd be around, but I thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing, he said, stepping closer to the porch. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the farm. It's looking good out here. You've been working hard, Clara nodded. I've had a lot to keep me busy, but it feels good to be doing something that's mine. James tilted his head, considering her words. That's important, he said. You've built this place even when it felt like everything was working against you. That's not something everyone can say. Clara's smile widened, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. I didn't want to give up on it. I couldn't. James stepped closer and leaned against the railing of the porch, his eyes meeting Clara's. You've got strength, Clara. I can see it. And you've got a lot of courage, too. Not everyone would make the decisions you've made. A lot of people just go along with what they're told. Clara's gaze softened. Sometimes I wonder if I've made the right choice. I thought my family would understand. But the more time passes, the more it feels like I've lost them for good. James sighed, looking out over the horizon. Family is complicated. Sometimes they want what they think is best for us, even if it's not what we want. But you can't live your life for anyone else. You've got to live for yourself. Clara was silent for a moment, reflecting on his words. I know, it's just hard. I've spent so much time trying to please them, trying to be the person they wanted me to be, but I don't think I can do that anymore. James smiled gently. You don't have to, and you shouldn't. It's not easy, but you've already taken the hardest step. The rest will come. Clara met his gaze, and for the first time in a long while she felt truly seen. James wasn't offering her a quick fix or a way to escape her troubles. He was simply offering her understanding and encouragement, something she had desperately needed. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a future for her beyond the narrow confines of her past. As the evening wore on, the two of them sat on the porch, watching the stars slowly begin to twinkle in the darkening sky. They spoke of small things, of the weather, of the work Clara had done on the farm, but there was a quiet comfort in their conversation. It wasn't the kind of conversation that demanded answers or solutions. It was simply the kind of conversation that two people share when they've found a moment of peace. I've been thinking about what you said, Clara said after a long pause, about being true to myself. I think you're right. I can't keep living for other people. I need to find my own way. James nodded. It's not an easy road, but it's your road to walk, and that makes all the difference, Clara smiled softly. Thank you, James, for everything. James tipped his hat and gave her a knowing smile. You don't need to thank me. I just said what needed to be said. As the night deepened, Clara felt something inside her stir, a feeling she hadn't experienced in months. It was hope. Hope that she could build the life she had always dreamed of, the life she had almost given up on. And though there were still many obstacles ahead, she knew that she wasn't facing them alone. James's visit had reminded her of something important, that there were still people who cared, people who understood, and more importantly, that she had the strength within herself to move forward no matter what the world expected of her. The road ahead was unclear, and the future was still full of questions. But Clara no longer feared it. For the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that her choices were her own. And with that, as the stars above the farm shone brightly, Clara finally felt like she had a sense of peace. It wasn't a perfect peace, nor was it the end of her struggles. But it was a beginning of something that had been waiting for her all along. Months had passed since that quiet evening on the porch with James Westbrook. The seasons had shifted, bringing the warmth of summer and the harvest season to the farm. Clara's life had changed in ways she had not anticipated. The loneliness she had once felt had softened, replaced by a sense of purpose and independence. Though her relationship with her family had not yet healed completely, Clara no longer felt the same desperation she once did. She had found a new strength within herself, one that no longer relied on the approval of others. Her decision to stand up for herself had been the beginning of a journey she hadn't expected to take. But the more Clara worked the land, the more she realized just how capable she was. She had always known how to run the farm, but now the work felt different. It felt like her own. Each day she rose with the sun, tending to the animals and the crops with a sense of pride. She was no longer just doing it out of obligation. She was doing it because it was hers and she had earned it. But the change in Clara wasn't just in the work she did. It was also in her heart. She had learned to trust herself, to make decisions for herself without seeking anyone else's approval. It was a quiet kind of power, one that grew over time and rooted itself deeply within her. One evening, as Clara worked in the barn, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps outside. It was a sound she had come to recognize. James was coming to visit again. Over the past few months, he had become a steady presence in her life, not just as a neighbor, but as someone who had always been there when she needed a kind word or a listening ear. And each time they spoke, she felt more and more at peace. Clara wiped her hands on a cloth as she stepped outside to greet him. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden light over the farm. James was there, standing near the fence, his horse grazing nearby. "Evening, Clara," he said with a warm smile. His usual calm presence had become a source of comfort for her, and she had come to look forward to these visits. "Evening, James," Clara replied, returning his smile. "You're early today," James chuckled softly. "I thought I'd come by before it got too dark. I wanted to talk to you about something." Clara's curiosity piqued. "What's on your mind?" James hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon before he met Clara's gaze again. "I've been thinking a lot about you and everything that's happened. The way you've stood up for yourself, how you've kept this place running all on your own. I've seen a lot of people struggle, but I haven't seen many people do it with the strength that you've shown." Clara felt a warmth rise in her chest, but she didn't know how to respond. James wasn't one to offer praise lightly, and his words meant more to her than she could say. But there was still something that tugged at her heart, something she hadn't yet been able to put into words. "I've had my share of doubts," Clara admitted, looking down at the dirt beneath her boots. "There are days when I still wonder if I've made the right choice. It's hard, especially with my family still not understanding." James nodded. "I know it's been tough, but sometimes the hardest paths lead to the greatest rewards, and you've already built something here, something real." Clara looked up at him, meeting his eyes. "I don't know if I could have done it without your support." James shook his head, smiling softly. "I didn't do much. I just said what needed to be said. You were the one who took the steps. You've always had the strength in you, Clara." Clara felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't expected. She had been so focused on building her life alone, so determined to prove she could stand on her own, that she had never considered that perhaps she didn't have to be alone after all. She had been so wrapped up in proving herself to the world, to her family, that she hadn't stopped to think about what it might be like to share that life with someone. James seemed to sense the shift in her, for he stepped closer, his expression gentle. "I know you've built this life for yourself, Clara, but that doesn't mean you have to walk this road by yourself. You've got more than enough strength, but sometimes strength is knowing when to share that load." Clara's heart raced as she absorbed his words. She had always thought that love and partnership were things to be feared, things that could tie her down. But now, with James standing before her, she wondered if maybe love wasn't about being tied down at all. Maybe it was about sharing a life, two people supporting each other, side by side with their own dreams and goals, but also with a shared future. "James," she said softly, her voice trembling a little, "I never thought I could be with anyone again, not after everything I've been through. But when I'm with you, it doesn't feel like I have to choose between myself and what I want. It feels like we could build something together." James smiled, his eyes lighting up. "Clara, I'm not asking you to give up your dreams or your independence. I'm asking you to share them with me, to walk beside me, just as we've both walked alone for so long." Clara felt a rush of emotion, relief, hope, and something deeper she hadn't expected. She realized that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her own anymore. There was a kind of freedom in sharing that weight, in trusting someone enough to lean on them. "I think," Clara began, her voice steady now, "I think I'd like that. I'd like to share my life with you, James. I've built something strong here, and I believe we could build something even stronger, together." James took her hand gently in his, and for a moment neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. The bond between them had grown naturally over time, built on mutual respect, understanding, and the quiet, unspoken support they had offered each other. From that moment on, Clara knew that her life was no longer just hers to build. She had someone by her side, someone who respected her independence and supported her dreams. And in return, Clara found a new kind of strength in the shared journey ahead. The town, once critical of Clara's decisions, slowly began to see the woman she had become. She was no longer the young woman who had defied expectations. She was the woman who had built a life that reflected her strength, her courage, and her ability to love and be loved. Clara and James went on to build a life together, a partnership based on mutual respect and love. Their ranch flourished, and over time they became an example to others that strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about standing together, with love and support in the face of any challenge. And so, Clara's legacy was not just one of independence. It was a legacy of love, of finding balance between strength and vulnerability, and of creating something lasting with someone who truly understood her. For Clara, the journey had just begun, and with James by her side, she knew that anything was possible.